Hi everyone, it's Lindsay. I'm back today with another video and I want to share how I made this multi-dimensional scene with the brand new Gnome is Where the Heart Is stamp set from Clair stamps. Now here's a look at all the supplies I used on my card today. You'll find the full supply list with links down below or over on my blog. Now here's a look at this new stamp set. This is part of the new release that is happening today, and there's a blog hop going on. So if you go over to my blog, follow the list, leave a comment of what your favorite stamp set from this release is, and you will be entered into a giveaway for a Clair Stamps gift card. So of course, let's go ahead and get started on this card now. Now, whenever I first seen this stamp set, I absolutely love the little gnomes in this set, but I love this mushroom house. I have a thing for mushrooms, so I knew I wanted to use it. I love coloring them. So I'm using my stamp positioner, and I've got some plain white cardstock in there, and I'm going to be inking this stamp up with some Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I'm going to be coloring with my colored pencils today, my Prismacolor colored pencils, and I'll be blending out with some Gamsol or OMS, whatever you want to call it. But this is my favorite ink to do that. It doesn't bleed, it doesn't move around on me, and using my stamp positioner, I can stamp this a few times and get a really nice dark black ink. Memento isn't the darkest black ink out there, but it's what I like to use with my alcohol markers and for my OMS as well. I'm also going to be stamping a lot of the other stamps in this set. I've got my two little gnomes loaded up onto my Misty here, and this is the mini Misty I'm using today. I'm going to stamp those down a few times, and then I've also got some little mushrooms. There's two sets of mushrooms, one with just one mushroom that's larger, and then you've got a set of two right here that I'm stamping. And then also there's some flowers, which I'll be stamping as well. Again, there are a couple different flowers in this set you can stamp. There is a single flower that I'm stamping here. And then there's also a little cluster of two flowers that you can stamp as well. And I'll be using all of these different images on my card today. Now I did some coloring of these off camera, my little gnomes, but I will be coloring this little mushroom on camera today. And like I said before, I'm using my Prismacolor colored pencils, and I'll be blending out with my OMS. So I'm going to be using several different browns today, and I already have my blending stumps off to the right hand side. You can see they are prepped and ready to go. I like to use an emery board, a nice rough one that I have on hand, to blend off my paper or to scrap off my paper that are on my blending stumps with the color on them, and then I just switch in between my colors like that. You can see I'm just using a little bit of that OMS to blend together a few different colors to get some shading and get that blending. If you don't like this look and you just like to use your colored pencils, you can always do that, but sometimes I like to blend them out, sometimes I just like to blend them on their own. Now for the top of my mushroom on the little spots, I'm using some red. I'm going for very traditional colors like you would see kind of in a storybook. And I blended those out as well. Now on my little door, I'm using a few different colors of browns that are different from what I used on the bottom of the mushroom. This is where a large set of colored pencils comes in handy. I've got several shades and tones of browns that I can use all along this card, or all along this mushroom, I should say. Now on the underneath part of the mushroom, I'm going for a little bit of a burnt orange and kind of almost a pale, very, very pale yellow to kind of blend that out and create a tan sort of undertone on the mushroom. And once I blend out the first time, if I've blended it a little bit too much or I've lost a little bit of that shading and that very deep color, I come back in and add more of that. And if I think it needs blended out, I will. If not, if the paper's still a little bit wet with that OMS, it kind of blends on its own, then I just leave it as is. This is just kind of a lot of practicing and just kind of feeling of how this is going. Sometimes you're going to need to blend, sometimes you're not. It really just depends on what you think looks the best. So on the top of the mushroom, I'm coming back in with those same colors I used on the very bottom. I'm just going a shade lighter with my blending, so it does end up just a little bit lighter than the bottom of the mushroom. And again, I'm coming back in with that darkest color where the shading would be the darkest. And in this situation, there wasn't enough OMS left, so I did blend it out once again. So after all the coloring was done, I did fussy cut out all of my images, and you can see my other little colored images that I colored in very quickly with my colored pencils as well. Now, if you are not a fan of fussy cutting, Clair Stamps does offer free SVG file downloads with all of their stamp sets. So if you have an electronic die cutting machine, that is a great way to go. Now I need to make a stencil for my background on this card. I am using this delicate cloud border die. I'm not sure the company on this, but any cloud border die will do. I just went with this one because it's a little bit smaller of a cloud on this, and the images are a little bit smaller. I'm also going to be die cutting this picket fence die from Tailored Expressions with some white cardstock. These dies that I'm getting ready to use are no longer available, but there are tons of companies out there that make picket fence dies, grass border dies, cloud border dies, clouds, banners, you name it, you name a company, they probably have a die that you can use for this. So use whatever you have on hand. Now I'm also going to be cutting some small clouds from some white cardstock, a banner from white cardstock, and then this grass border from green cardstock, and this is from Tailored Expressions as well. I'm going for smaller die cuts here because my images are a little bit smaller. Now I need to go ahead and make a panel with a little cutout for my frame. So I've got a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 piece of white cardstock here, size of an A2 card panel, and then I've got a small rectangle die that I'm going to place right in the center and create a cutout in the middle of it. I like to use washi tape to hold my die in place as I run it through my die cutting machine. You can use painter's tape, whatever you have on hand. Now for my next piece, I'm going to go ahead and cut a piece of craft cardstock with a little bit larger rectangle die. This is actually from a nesting rectangle die set, so this is 2 steps up from what I used before. Now once I had that cut, I went ahead and on that die cut I inlaid this smaller rectangle that I used beforehand. I'm going to lay that right in the center it up, and run this through my die cutting machine as well and create a frame. Now if you wanted to, you could run both pieces at the same time, but sometimes I find a little bit hard to line up that way, especially if the cutting edge of the die isn't centered on the die itself. It can create a little bit of a wonky frame. So for this one, I did it in 2 steps. Now on that frame, I'm going to run it through my die cutting machine with an embossing folder. This is a wood grain embossing folder, and that's just going to give a nice wooden texture to this frame and give it a little bit something extra instead of just plain craft. Now on a card base, I overlaid that panel, and I did cut off 1/8 of an inch on each one of the sides to make it 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, just a little bit smaller than my A2 size card panel. And I overlaid that, centered it up on a card base, and marked out the 4 corners. This is going to allow me to put my cloud border down onto my card panel, create my clouds on the background, and not have to worry about it showing on the sides of that frame that I made. Now I'm using this cloud border that I did die cut from computer paper, and I am just adding a little bit of ink right onto the top of that and kind of pulling it up. This is going to create a nice little halo that looks like clouds on the background of my scene that I'm creating. I am using Salty Ocean Distress Ink and my Mini Ink blending tool, and like I said, I did cut this from computer paper just because it's so much thinner. I don't have to use as much pressure to get the ink onto the paper, and there's not going to be a gap. Now I like to move my stencil that I created here around a little bit, so you can see on the first one I kind of centered it in the center of the panel. On the next step up, I put the left hand side even with the left hand side of the card base, and now I've got the right hand side even with the right hand side of the card base, and that's just going to give me different looks. So I've got the same stencil that I'm using here, but it looks different each time I take it a step up the card, so it's not the same on top of the same on top of the same. I also went back in and added just a little bit more ink to kind of deepen up that color just because it wasn't dark enough for what I was going for. And then I set that aside and put my frame on top of that panel that I had die cut out from the center. Now this frame I decided to add with a little bit of fun foam on the back and double-sided adhesive. This is going to give it a little bit of dimension and pop it away from that background. So I'll just overlay that, and because I use the same die, it lines up perfectly. Now I flip that over and I'm going to create my scene now. So right on the back, on the very bottom of that panel, on the opening, I'm going to add a very small line of glossy accents. Now because I am working with my scene, building it out from the front, I need to start from the very first images you're going to see and work my way to the background. So I started off with the grass border, and then for my picket fence die, I'm going to add that straight onto the panel on the A2 card base that I have, that I put my cloud border on. Again, I'm using glossy accents, and I'm adding quite a bit here just to make sure everything stays in place because there are so many layers going on. Now, I need to go ahead and make sure that this picket fence border, the bottom of it, will be lined up with the grass border. So I did measure that beforehand and I knew exactly where it needed to go, just for a heads up if you recreate this scene as well. Now I need to go ahead and put on my mushroom house, and I did that with a little strip of glossy accents along the bottom of the mushroom house. I placed that down and put an acrylic block on top to hold it in place while it dried. Now I'm going to pop this layer up as well. So I've got more fun foam and double-sided adhesive on all four sides and also on the mushroom house. I put a little bit up the top of that so it didn't kind of fall over and fade into the background. I wanted that to be popped up as well. I'll center this panel up, and I need to center it where I had those clouds and where I marked it out so my pencil marks don't show. And then I'll place that down right where it needs to go. And now it's time to add all the little fun bits that I created as well. So I've got those flowers, the mushrooms, and the little gnomes, and these I'm going to place down with some glossy accents. On each side I'm going to put a mushroom and flowers. So on the left hand side I've got that one single mushroom and the two flowers, and then on the right hand side I'll put the single flower and the double mushrooms just to kind of even it out. Now again, I use glossy accents to hold those down, and to make sure that these dry in place nice and firmly, I'll go ahead and place an acrylic block over the top just to make sure that it really is secure because these are such small little pieces. Now for my little gnomes, I'm going to place them inside the frame. You could always place them outside like I just had them, but I went ahead and placed them inside. It would be cute either way. Again, I'm using glossy accents to hold these down, and I've got my little man on the left-hand side, and I used orange and blue jeans for him and did some brown shoes, and then my little woman gnome where I used some reds and purples and brown shoes as well. Place an acrylic block over the top of that and let everything dry nice and securely while I move on to the sentiment. Now while I was die cutting, I did die cut that white banner from cardstock, and I'm going to add my sentiment right onto that. I'm using my Misty for this, and I did line it up in the banner, picked it up with the top of my lid, and now I'll go ahead and stamp it down in black dye ink. I am using the Thanks sentiment from this stamp set. There are so many great sentiments in this set. You've got Gnome is where the heart is, hello, hi, love grows here. This could be used for any number of occasions. I'm using it as a thank you card, but you could use it as a moving card, a new home card, just a hello card. It's pretty versatile. I popped that up right on top of the frame with just plain adhesive. I didn't want to add any more dimension that was already on this card. And finally, I finished off this scene with those two little die cut clouds. I've got a larger one and a smaller one. I'm just going to add those right on the left and right hand side of the frames. And again, I'm putting these down with some just glossy accents. No more dimension needs to go on this card. There is enough. So I placed those down, and once that was finished, that completely completed the card for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and a look at the brand new Gnome is Where the Heart Is stamp set from Clair. And remember, there are lots more new sets that are being released today, so make sure you hop along with the blog hop and enter yourself for a chance to win the gift card. I will leave you with this last look at the finished card and also a few photos as well. the left side of your screen, you're going to see a few different links you can click on. Thank you guys so very much for watching today, and happy crafting!